Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about massive missile and drone strikes that were carried out both by the Russians and by the Ukrainians. And first let's discuss the Ukraine attack. According to information we have, during the previous 12 hours, the Ukrainians carried out another drone attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. According to pro-Russian resources, the Ukrainians used around 150 drones, but according to the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, they brought down almost every single drone that was attacking the territory of Russia. At the same time, the Russians struck back, and when talking about Russian attack, obviously this attack was much more powerful in comparison with the Ukrainian one. According to information we have, the Russians launched around 355 drones, and this is the biggest number probably since the beginning of the special military operation. The Ukrainians reported that they managed to bring down just 288 drones. Furthermore, Ukrainians reported that they managed to destroy up to 9 missiles. So anyway, we see that the situation is getting worse and worse for Ukrainians with their air defense systems, and the most important thing that according to information we have, now Ukrainians have huge problems with missiles to different air defense systems, to the Patriot air defense systems, to IRC air defense system, and to French Kratal air defense system. So as for now, according to information we have, Ukrainians requested for additional missiles, but the sources reported that, for example, the United States of America refused to provide Ukrainians additional missiles because, according to Marco Rubio, United States of America currently doesn't have enough of missiles. So anyway, this is the situation. Furthermore, during the previous night, we got additional videos of how the Russians exactly were bombing and attacking the city of Kiev and the western part of Ukraine during the previous missile attack. As for the previous night missile attack, we haven't received almost anything, just reports from different sources, but without any videos that can confirm Russian attacks. I believe that today we're going to receive additional videos of consequences or missiles above the territory of Ukraine, but as of the beginning of the 26th, we have just videos during the nights or between the 24th and 25th of May of 2025. So this is another place that was attacked by the Russians. We see the consequences, lots of buildings were destroyed. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. We have lots of very important statements and very important reports. So first let's talk about the Sumy direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. First, let's talk about the village of Loknya, Belovody, and Volodymyrivka. I'll remind you that on the 24th of May of 2025, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the group of forces north managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Loknya. Based on this report, we adjusted the map on the 24th of May of 2025. And today we got additional report published by the group of forces north, and according to them, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to secure the village of Belovody, and the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Volodymyrivka. When talking about the village of Belovody, we have both the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and this video. And in this video, we can see a Russian soldier that was waving with the flag of unit that was responsible probably for offensive operation in this area. So now we can summarize everything that happened for previous 3 days. First, the Russians secured the village of Loknya, and basically the Russians entered the northern part of Yunakievka. During the next 2 days, the Russians were trying to break through Ukraine defense in the village of Belovody, and by the morning of the 26th of May of 2025, the Russians managed to do this. Furthermore, according to information we have, according to report of the group of forces north, the Ukrainians in the area of Volodymyrivka didn't expect that the Russians were going to attack in this area, and when the Russians began their offensive operation, according to information we have, Ukrainians basically abandoned their positions without showing any resistance and moved further in the southern direction. So as we discussed in the previous videos, now the Russians are going to move further in the southern direction. Now the Russians are going to attack the villages of Alexeyevka, Dniprovka, Vodolahi, Yablunovka, and to attack the settlement of Yunakievka from the northwest. This will allow the Russians to cut the main supply lines and to force Ukrainians to fall back from Yunakievka as well in the direction of the village by the name of Novosich. So we see that the Russian secure zone operation is ongoing. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the southern direction, and we see that the Russian offensive operation is gaining momentum. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the most important and the most interesting area. We're going to talk about the southern part of the Kliban-Bytsky pocket, or the southern direction of the city of Konstantinovka. As you can see, during the previous night we got a lot of icons, a lot of flags, a lot of adjustments, which means that the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. Russian offensive, or Russian final offensive, in this area started approximately on the 23rd of May of 2025. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 24th of May. The Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of the village of Alexandropol. By the end of the 25th of May, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly, and the Russians entered the village of Zarya from the west, and the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the village of Romanovka. But furthermore, according to information we have, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed that the village of Romanovka was completely secured, and that was probably a turning point in the battle for this pocket, and that was exactly the moment when the Ukrainians realized that they had no chances for successful control over this area, and the Ukrainians decided to fall back from this pocket with the purpose to save their lives. And during the 25th and the beginning night, between the 25th and the 26th of May, the Ukrainians were trying to save their lives by retreating in the northern direction. By the morning and by the beginning of the 26th of May, we have additional changes. As you can see, the Russians established almost complete control over the village of Gnatovka. The Russians managed to secure the southern part of the village of Stara Nikolaevka. Probably these farms to the north of the village are still under complete Ukrainian control, but at least by the morning of the 26th of May. But we believe that Ukrainians would, let's say, abandon their positions from this area in upcoming hours, maybe not even minutes. Furthermore, the Russians managed to secure completely the western part of the village of Zarya, and this information, which is most important, was confirmed by many mappers. Most of them are pro-Russian, and this information was also confirmed by neutral mappers. When talking about pro-Ukrainian resources, they still haven't confirmed anything, and we see that Ukrainians and Ukrainian resources are trying to avoid the situation, trying not to talk a lot about the situation in this direction. Most likely, currently they are controlled by some top-level military authorities with the purpose not to allow this information to come on the surface and not to allow anybody to understand what exactly is happening right now to the south of Kliban-Bytsky Reservoir. So the Russians continue their offensive operation, and we expect that today Ukrainians, or at least those who still can do this, will abandon their positions from this pocket, and the Russians will take this territory under complete control. Most likely several hundreds will be caught in cauldron by the Russians in this area, and then they're gonna have just several options, either to surrender or to stay there forever. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation around and along the N32 roads. Today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the village of Yelizavetovka by taking under control additional trenches and fortifications. So this stronghold was secured by the Russians completely, which is very important. And another important thing is that the Russians began offensive operation in the direction of Popov Yar and in the direction of the settlement of Poltavka. This information was confirmed by pro-Russian resources. Today we got several reports. According to them, the Russians answered both villages. So when talking about the village of Popov Yar, this information that the Russians took under control the most southern part was also confirmed by neutral mappers. When talking about the village of Poltavka, this information was confirmed just by pro-Russian resources. So we don't know for sure whether the Russians answered the village, both villages or not. But obviously, if the Russians haven't answered both villages yet, but we believe and expect that this should happen in the very near future. But anyway, we expect that this information will be confirmed during the next day, and we will color the map additionally and accordingly to additional Russian progress. So we see that Ukrainian front line in this area continue collapses, And it's very difficult to say and understand what exactly the Ukrainians are going to do next, because if the Russians are able to secure this territory and to take on the complete control these two villages, then the Russians would be able to shorten the distance to the first supply line between the village, between the Pokrovsk agglomeration and Konstantinovka agglomeration. We're talking about this road. So this is going to be complete fire and FPV drone control, and Ukrainians will start suffering huge problems with their logistic. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Dnipro direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. Probably the most important updates are coming from the Kamar direction and from Alexeyevka area. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, the Russians continue their offensive operation further in the western direction. As you can see, many mappers adjusted their maps significantly, and as we discussed in the previous videos, the main problem for the Ukrainians in this part is that they have no strongholds and trenches in this pocket. So as you can see, the next defense belt goes between the villages of Kamar and Zaporozhye. So there is a gap. We're talking about these fields almost without any strongholds and fortifications there. So the Russians have no problems, no barriers to move further in the western direction. The only thing that can limit or to slow down the Russians is FPV drones of the armored forces of Ukraine above this territory, but at the same time the Russians established their own FPV drone control over the next defense belt. In this video we can see how Ukrainians were trying to carry out rotation, probably to bring additional forces, but they were ambushed by the Russian drones and destroyed. So the Russians continue offensive, and most likely during the next 72 hours lots of territories in this gap will be colored in the Russian favor. Now let's talk about the Gulay-Polye direction. The Russians continue their offensive operation. According to information we have, there are very heavy clashes for the villages of Zelene Polye and Novopol. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians suffered losses, and both the Russians and the Ukrainians show fierce resistance and fierce pressure from their side. So according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the territory, the map in this area was adjusted. Once again, the Russians secured almost 70% of Novopol. The Russians managed to take additional control and captures next tree lines to the west of the village of Zelene Polye, and the Russians managed to shorten the distance to this intersection of tree lines in the northern direction to the north of the village of Zelene Polye. So the Russians outflanked the village of Zelene Polye, Novopol, and are about to finish the battle for this territory. The next stop for the Russians is the village of Volodymyrivka. Once again, the Russians in this area are going to move further in the western direction, at least until they get the village of Novoivanovka and the village of Uspenovka. Maybe from the village of Uspenovka the Russians will change their decision whether to move further in the southwestern direction or to turn in the northern direction, but as for the current stage, Uspenovka is the final target, but we are calling this direction as the Gulay-Polye direction. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.